It's August 18th in Japan, and we are still going through a heat wave here in Japan. Today, here in Kyoto, Nabe, it's going to be about 96 degrees Fahrenheit. This whole last 3-4 weeks has been quite hot. Japan had a typhoon last Friday. Some of you may have heard that the Shinkansen and all the flights were canceled for Friday, but fortunately there was very little or if any damage, and no one died or there were no injuries. But the heat wave continues, and every year, maybe some of you have heard that in Japan, over 1,000 people die every year due to heat stroke. Another interesting thing is that Prime Minister Kishida is stepping down as Prime Minister, which was not really expected, but he felt that he had to take responsibility for the Abe faction scandal and the kickbacks and everything. So he'll be stepping down. Several people are interested in running for Prime Minister. My hope is that there is a gentleman by the name of Kono Taro. If I could vote, I would vote for him, is because he studied abroad. He got his degree. He was a degree-seeking student at Georgetown in Washington, D.C. in the United States. So I believe that he would have a more critical thinking way of looking at things and a more logical approach to problem solving. So I hope he gets it, but we'll see. There's several other people running. Exchange rate is about 147 to the dollar. So it's slowly declining. But again, remember, anything over 125 is still great. So still in your favor if you come to Japan. 147 is awesome. I remember when it got down to 130, I started changing some money thinking that it was going to zoom back up. Never did. Actually went the reverse way. And so I'm still in a holding pattern. The Koshien baseball tournament. For those of you who don't know about the Japan high school tournament league, it's called Koshien, which is the name of the area or the stadium out in Hyogo. And this is where all the high schools, the best of each prefecture, go and compete twice a year. It's the honor of honors for all baseball high school players. In fact, if they get to go to Koshien, when they leave, they all take little bottles of the soil of home plate and they put it and they bring it back and they put it almost like an altar. So it's a really reverent thing to be able to go and say that I went to Koshien for the rest of their life. That's like a legacy. I went to Koshien. It's happening right now. I think the only thing that they've been careful about is that they changed some of the scheduling so that the players wouldn't be playing in the mid-heat. I think there's a morning game and I think there's a late afternoon game, but they changed it because of the terrible heat wave that continues on. This is the end of Obon. And so what they have on the news is they call it the U-turn. U-turn means that people went home for Obon. A lot of them went to where they were born, where their ancestry or their graves are, and now they are returning back home. They call it U-turn. So last night on the news, I saw, especially going back to major metropolitan areas like Osaka or even Kyoto or especially Tokyo. In Tokyo, there was a 17-kilometer, maybe what is that, about 12-mile traffic jam. And so today it should be even longer, but people are trying to get back for work, which starts tomorrow. If this is your first time on my YouTube live stream, I'm Mike Matsuno. I'm originally from Hawaii. I'm a Japanese American, Yonsei, fourth generation. My great-grandparents left Japan for Hawaii, over 140 years ago, maybe? Somewhere in the 1880s. I've been in Japan for over 30 years. I have a Man in Japan YouTube channel that introduces different perspectives of Japan. The lives are part of it. I do a podcast interview style, and I just do regular videos too. If you're interested, in the description is the link. Please subscribe and comment what you're interested in about Japan, and maybe I could do a little video or cover a story about that. So again, 2 live streams ago, we talked about English education and how that in Japan, the English education system has really not been that successful. Even though now students start in the elementary school, 3rd and 4th grade, 5th and 6th grade, they do just one class a week. In the junior high school and high school, they do 3 years. And in the university, many people do 2 to 4 years. So a person could basically study between 6 to 10 years, and yet the ability to communicate in English is still very limited in Japan. So even with all this studying, it's not conducive to people actually being able to communicate. We talked about that most English teachers are not able to really speak English. The focus on English in Japanese schools are basically grammar and reading, not speaking and not much writing. They're taught through the grammar translation method. For those of you who know the grammar translation method, it's basically translating directly from reading English and then translating into Japanese, the home country language, which is not a good way to teach communicative English, of course. And although we have to hold the English teachers, the Japanese English teachers responsible, as my friend Sammy had mentioned in the live 4 weeks ago actually now, he mentioned that a lot of times it's the students that are not motivated. They have to be motivated. They have to take responsibility too. So you can't only hold the teachers for responsibility for not improving. So yes, it's two ways. It goes two ways, right? On the last live, which was 2 weeks ago, we talked about internationalizing and globalization. And of course, there's a link between English, right? Because for most Japanese, the idea of how to internationalize, or what is kokusaika, internationalization, or what is globalization, sounds really good. A lot of universities like to use it in their brochure or their pamphlets to get people to come, but nobody really can define it. In fact, if you ask most average Japanese, what does internationalization or globalization mean? Most of them, well, some might say study abroad, but a lot of them will just say someone who can speak English well. That's pretty much the bar. It's very low. And it's not about living and working abroad. It's not about studying internationalization or globalization. And if you recall, in my last live, I talked about in 1990, the foreign ministry established this policy about creating global jinsai, or international human resources, in Japan. These people who are going to be Japan's corporate samurai warriors out there competing in the 21st century. And the idea was to create people who be, ready to go when they came out of the university. So that was part of the whole foreign ministry and the Ministry of Education. They're trying to move toward this global jinsai. Prime Minister Abe was really pushing it, but their policies really did not seem to do very well. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about that, about the university level. I did also talk about internationalization in the last live, about how I think Japan has to allow more foreigners into their workforce. And presently the Japanese government is allowing more, interns, or they give them a different name, interns or like trainees. They don't use the I word, immigration, because that gets a lot of pushback from more conservative circles. They try to use these other words, but they are letting more like CNAs, auto shop workers, agricultural workers from abroad into Japan. And I kind of was talking about this in the last live, was I think they should be allowing more high level as far as IT and tech people into Japan, because that's where I think Japan is lagging behind. A lot of people don't understand that. People think that Japan is so way ahead because in robotics, or they have the supercomputer, space travel, they're ahead in certain fields. But overall, just IT and computer and tech, they're actually way behind, especially if you compare them to the United States. I would say they're 10 years, maybe even 20 years behind in certain areas, especially like at the universities, working online and things. They're way behind. I talked about India in my last live, where if you brought Indian graduates, a lot of them are majoring in IT and tech, and you brought them to Japan, they're at such a high level already. They have a 30% unemployment for this age group in India, that I'm sure they'd be happy to come. And you bring them here and you help them settle in, you set up a support system, and you have them, teach and work with your Japanese programmers and computer people. But the problem is, this idea of internationalization is just too foreign for most Japanese companies. They don't want to have to deal with people from India or other countries coming in and setting up a support system, or have to give them Japanese lessons or whatever they have to do. They don't want to do the initial investment or the front loading, which means that what they do is they go back to their old plan. They hire Japanese graduates, and many of them do not have any IT or tech skills, which means what? The learning curve. Imagine if you had to learn how to program and you weren't that savvy. It could take years, 3 years, 5 years, who knows how long it would take. My idea is bring in the best and the brightest, set up a support system, and that's a really good form of internationalization. But again, most companies either are not willing, don't know how, it's not within their bandwidth. The learning curve, if they use this present system now, is going to take many, many more years. Bring in the best and the brightest and set up the support system for them. Another thing we talked about before in one of the lives was they need to reform their education system, because their education system, not only the English language education, but in general, is based on rote memory and putting it on a test. If you have a photographic memory, you should be able to get into Tokyo University, because basically it's memorizing and putting it on a test. There's no critical thinking or problem solving. There's mathematics, yes, but there's not that kind of critical thinking skills that are tested on any of the Japanese exams. So people are not going to study for that because, of course, they don't really need it. The idea is, how do you reform the Ministry of Education? And I think this also needs internationalization or globalization in the sense that get the ideas from outside. And, I heard the story about Finland, and I had said this before about English education, where I think for Finland, whether you're a kindergarten English teacher or you're a high school or university, everyone needs a master's degree. And Finland before was very low as far as education goes, many, many, many years ago. And what they did is they sent out experts to find out what everybody else was doing, came back, created their own system. And today they're one of the top, if not the top, in education. And it's only a country of 5 million people, but yes, they have figured out how to educate their population. Japan should do something like that. I think part of it is Japan is very insular, that they always kind of depend like within. They figure that they don't want to go outside. And I think that works against them. And again, that's also a kind of internationalization, being open to accept new ideas, to create new ways to make your society and your culture better. So internationalization and globalization still very small in Japan. People don't understand what it means and what to do. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about the universities, and where you would think, okay, if anybody can make things happen and internationalize and globalize, it should be the universities, right? You got smart people, you got smart teachers, professors, and you got people who are going to go into the workforce, so you want to have them ready, supposedly. So today, I believe first, I just want to say from my perspective, a lot of times I'm just giving you my opinion, and you can take it for what it's worth. But today's subject is a little bit close to me because I think I'm one of the few people who have studied for a degree. Now remember, degree seeking and studying for a degree versus just doing an exchange program or study abroad program for a year or a semester, no comparison at all. Completely different. When you go on an exchange or study abroad, it's usually a fun time. You're having a great time. It's not that serious. It's not that strict. When you think about like Americans coming to Japan to study on an exchange or study abroad program, they're not studying in Japanese. They're studying Japanese. And then in the afternoon, most universities have courses on Japanese economics or history or manga or whatever in English. So it's catered down to the American or the English-speaking student. Whereas if Japanese go over on an exchange with an American university, they are supposed to take all their courses in English. And if they want to take ESL or English as a second language and study English, that's on a separate paying system where they have to pay. To me, when I was working as the director of the International Center of Osaka Gakuen University, I used to fight with American universities, not fight, but argue and say, your students are coming in for like a JSL, Japan as a second language. They're studying Japanese and they're getting courses in English that we create. Why can't you offer the same? But again, America, their universities are very business oriented. They control, right? Because they're the top. And they basically said, sorry, this is the way it is. It's kind of like take it or leave it. So again, a lot of times, Americans say, well, I studied in Japan. It wasn't that hard. Most Americans or, Western students are studying in English, or they're studying Japanese as a language. They're not studying in Japanese. I have studied in Japanese at Doshisha University for a master's degree. And of course, I got my degree at Oregon, Willamette University, undergraduate, and I got another master's at University of Hawaii. So I have studied in both countries. And I have also taught at universities, at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks and here in Osaka Gakuen University. So I have taught and I have studied in both systems, degrees, and then I also did as a profession. And so I think today I can give you kind of a good insight or perspective of how the Japanese universities are operating to so-called internationalize or globalize. Here are some of the challenges. Let's just jump into it for Japanese universities. Most professors and administrators don't understand the concept of how to internationalize the curriculum. And when you talk about international curriculum, most people wouldn't understand that either. But to people who are more in the field, it's about like international your classrooms, your textbooks, your examples, your PowerPoint, if you use PowerPoint, your videos, or whatever you use, you're trying to internationalize it by bringing in examples and things from outside of Japan. As well as maybe you're doing like an online exchange with another country. And usually, of course, it's in English, which means that English again becomes a problem here, right? If the students your students in Japan don't understand English, then you really can't do that, or you're not at the same level. I've seen many online exchanges, and I see them even in Japan. In Japan, a lot of times they want to boast, like, oh yeah, look, we're doing this, online. I forgot the name of it. They have some special acronym. But when you look at it, really, what they're doing, it's really low level. It's still amateur hour. No one is doing it it at a level that's even close to getting some real value out of it. And so that's why I think that Japan really needs to up their game as far as internationalizing, English, all part of that, right? Also, the idea of how to collaborate with overseas university is a big thing. And the problem here is that they are not able to, whether it's communicate well or they don't know the system, because a lot of the Japanese professors in Japan have never studied abroad or never worked abroad. So they don't have the idea of how to really interact and how to ask for, okay, let's work together, or how to collaborate, how to interact. And that works against Japan. And that's an international skill, right? To be able to work with people outside of your country. There's other things that are problems in Japan. They teach in a very Japanese way. Most professors, it's one way. And many times it's only one test. There's not constant assessment. Like in the United States, you have little papers, you have the quizzes, you have tests, you have presentations. In Japan, for many classes, except for the upper seminars are a little bit different, it's usually just one test. And you know what? The test, most times, I don't know if it's changed since I was teaching, but the students never get back their final exam. So they get a grade on the report card, but they never know why they got that. They never know what they did right or wrong. And on the student side, they don't really care, it seems, or they're not worried about it, as long as they pass. And there's no real conscious thing about GPA. GPA in Japan, maybe it's changed since I left the university a few years ago, but GPA doesn't matter in Japan, really. You could get like all D's, like a 1.0 or 2.0 at Tokyo University and still graduate and probably get a good job. GPA does not matter, which means that students are not motivated to get their test scores. And like when I was teaching at University of Alaska in Fairbanks, I had students out my door lined up before the test and then after the test to get their results, and they want to know why this was wrong or right at this. So completely different. And that's why I believe that Japan, if they want to get on the game to internationalize their curriculum, the professors need to learn how to teach in a more, I don't want to say Western style, but a more Socratic way of why and how. And I think that's what's really important is how do you want students to ask the question, right? Why? Not just remember and put on. So in Japan, the focus seems to be on the what, and then just put it on the test. And many of the Western university style of teaching is more about why and figuring out the reasoning. So again, that's a different focus. Another thing that Japanese universities need to do is they need to hire more foreign or international teachers to help them internationalize and improve the campus in that way. There's only like 5% of all faculty in Japan that are foreign. Although it seems like a lot, and I see a lot of English teachers, but that's because I speak English and I'm running around in that circle, but there's only 5%. And also they need to learn how to set up, like promote internationalization through events and global fundraising and recycling. Now, there are some universities who are doing more on SDGs, SDG, sustainable development systems and things. But again, it's still very, very small. And I think the biggest thing goes back to professors have not studied abroad or not lived abroad, or have very little experience outside of maybe a honeymoon to Hawaii. Because they don't have that experience, they don't know what to do. It's not their fault. They don't know what to do as far as internationalizing, right? I mean, think about this way. And they can't push study abroad if they haven't studied abroad. It's like you can't sell steak if you haven't eaten steak, right? So until you experience it, it's hard for you to sell it. And that's the problem in Japan. Another thing is that university administrators have no clue of what internationalizing a campus is. So you got professors, you got administrators who really do not understand. If anything, everything is just left to the international section, the Kokusai-ka or the Kokusai Center, and they're supposed to be the experts. But again, a lot of times they have people who just rotate in and out, and they don't know, they have to learn from zero, and there's nothing, that they don't know very much, and so you just do more of the same. And let's look at Japan as far as universities in the world. In the top 100 universities in the world, 2 Japanese universities are in the top. Tokyo University, the number 1 university in Japan, is at number 29. Not even the top 20, number 29. In fact, they went up. They were like 37 a couple years ago. Now they're 29. And Kyoto University is number 68. Those are the only 2 You have China, I think they have 2 in the top 20. You have Singapore with a population of 5 million people. They're in the top 20. So Japan really needs to work on improving this, not only the ranking, but because one of the big things that they're judged on for this ranking is international outlook and research quality, those two things. And the research quality then also influences the university's research. Research and international are where Japan universities are suffering. If they internationalize, I think they could up their game all on both of these, much more. But again, remember, I talked about this before, and this is my own opinion. Japan is kind of like in Sakoku mind. They're still in a very closed society, where if most of your professors don't go out of Japan, how can they teach how to be more international, or how to internationalize, or how to take in new ideas? It's very difficult. It's not their fault. Again, they don't know what they don't know. But I think that's also a big challenge. So Japan has memorize, group mentality, submit to your higher ups, fear of failure, so they don't take initiatives. What a way to run an educational system, but it's just a ticket to the business world. Yeah, in a way, it's kind of sad is that everyone's just worrying about getting the job, right? But what Japan Ham is saying is very true. These are a lot of the limitations that hurt Japan and the Japanese. The idea of just rote memory, memorize, the group mentality where you always see that, and it is very still dominant. The standing nail gets pounded down. And I have experienced that personally, even on my jobs recently, that you cannot stand out. You gotta conform in a way. So how do you make change? Because the moment you try to make change, you're gonna stand out. And it means that the pounding nail is gonna come down on your head, right? I don't know what the answer is, and it's a very, very difficult thing, but I believe that that's what they need to work on. And of course, the idea of the samurai system, where if it's top down, if number one says green, everybody says green, even if they think it's red, right? And I remember an example was given to me by a president secretary of a university I know. The secretary was, he was a bright guy, nice guy. He once didn't go against the president, but said, oh, what about this option? And the president said to him, you listen to me. If I say green, then the color is green. If I say red, the color is red. From that moment on, he knew his place, and he continued to do that for the rest of his career. But how can you have change if that's the thinking, then maybe those types of organizations with that kind of leadership, maybe is basically hopeless. I don't know, or until that person gets changed. But even if they get changed, I'm sure their next person is going to be a lot like them, or whether it's their son or daughter or whoever continues, more of the same, right? I don't know, but I think that's one of the challenges that Japan really deals with. So yeah, I worry about Japan. I really want them to do well, and I know it sounds like I'm criticizing, but I think this is my area, so I think I'm speaking from perspective. Just some facts. Even like PhDs in Japan. And before, you couldn't get a PhD in Japan. You had to go outside because PhD weren't given to professors unless you had worked until you're like 60 or 70, and it was kind of given you as kind of like a thank you. But now you can get PhDs in Japan. But again, who's teaching the PhDs program if you don't have PhDs, right? I mean, so I don't know how that works. I would suggest if you want a PhD, go outside of Japan to get it. It's dropped 20% in Japan. So people are not going into the academic field. And it's a long road anyway, right? Another thing, a lot of things are going on is that a lot of the universities have older facilities, they have outdated curricula, they have aging staff, it takes money, and they can't really raise their tuition too much. Recently, they've been allowed to, but Ministry of Education has a rule that they can only charge 1.2 times the standard amount to international students, which is good for international students, but maybe not good for the university because it can't cover its cost. Another way to internationalize the campus is to increase, of course, international students, right? And maybe charge more so you can cover some of those costs, because international students require maybe Japanese lessons, maybe more support. So you could do something like that. But Japanese universities, again, they've always charged the same. It's changing in the recent years, and that's great for international students, but it doesn't help with the management of the university. Look at American universities. They charge 2 or even 3 times, not only America, Canada, Australia, UK, they charge you the special, super expensive rate if you're an international student. Japan, good deal in town then, basically almost the same, maybe 1.2 at the most. That's not much. It's not like double or triple, what a lot of Japanese students would pay if they went to study abroad, well, for a degree, let's say, they would be paying the premium price. That's how a lot of American universities make money. They overcharge international students. That's not the correct word, but that's what it looks like to me, especially since I worked in a Japanese university and I could see how much they were getting charged. But yes, increase the number of students. This would promote, a good image for Japan. Foreign students in Japan would help internationalize the classroom. It would help internationalize the campus. It would give Japanese students new ideas and new ways to think. And I think that what is also important is that if students would come to be degree-seeking students in Japan, it would really help because, again, degree-seeking students and study abroad or exchange are completely different. But again, very, very few Western students come here for the degree because it's the brand thing, right? A Japanese degree, if you're going to work in Japan, great, you can get your degree here because right away on your resume, it'll be recognized if you went to a good university, let's say. But if you go outside of Japan, maybe outside of Tokyo University or Kyoto University, it might be nobody will know your university and it doesn't help you with your brand, although the price is reasonable. And again, I would say that, for example, to increase the number of degree-seeking students in Japan, right now, Japan has only between 3 to 5%, I think it was, that are international students. Whereas you take a place like United Kingdom, UK, 20%, United States, 22%, Australia, 30%. That's their international market. Or Japan, and I understand, if you're an English-speaking country, of course, you're going to get more. But Japan could increase that. But part of the problem is what? Most of the classes in Japan are taught in Japanese, which means you have to know Japanese at a high level to be able to take classes. And yes, I did that and I struggled and I would never do that again, but I'm glad I did it once. But it was so hard. Think about it. If you're a student, like, do I want to go to Japan? Although I'll pay a good price, but I got to learn Japanese. It might take me 1, maybe 2 years. And then, to get to this program, and the brand itself is not that great because when I leave Japan, if I try to get a job in Australia or United States, maybe the university name won't sell. And so there's a lot of this going on. So again, that's the question a lot of people have to think. Now, the Japanese government is very optimistic, right? In 2033, they're looking at increasing their international students to 30%. That's big, right? If they could do that. But again, for me, it's not the price right now. It's more about the quality and how they teach. If they continue to teach Japanese style, where it's like one test, no accountability, basic memorization, nobody's coming. Just a few people who just want to study manga and stuff, maybe. Also too, hi Mike, are there specific programs that universities tend to send students abroad for exchange or extra credits? I know Japan is very strong in robotics, electronics, automotive, and material science. If you're talking about sending out on exchange, or even coming in, most exchange students or study abroad students, study abroad usually a semester or maybe 2 semesters, 1 year, will not be able to take courses in such fields as robotics, electronics, automotive, unless somehow you know the professor and they let you in just kind of a observer because of the level of the Japanese you will need to know. Now, if you speak Japanese, it could be a little bit different. But again, exchange and study abroad is more for the experience. It's not really for your area of study. It's more like a year off, not off, but a year of experience. It's not to go and I'm going to study robotics in Japan because that's my area. It wouldn't work because it'd be too hard. Now, there are some, like at the graduate level, there are courses that are taught in English, or at least half the courses are taught in English that you could come over if you're on an exchange at the graduate level and take those courses and probably get credit for it. So it's a little bit different. But in the mainframe, undergraduate, there are very few courses taught in English. Now, you have what is called the English program courses, which means that there are certain fields, they're very limited, that are taught all in English. And this was another brilliant idea, supposedly, of the Ministry of Education that, okay, let's be like Korea or Thailand, where they are now offering in English, all in English. So exchange students and study abroad students would come there and study. So that's what Japan came up with the idea. They made these big offerings to the big universities, national universities, and to private universities. They gave money to build these programs. Doshisha had one. All the big Tokyo University I think had one. Kyoto University had. The problem was, the idea was for Ministry of Education is they want the university, they give them like seed money, basically startup money for 5 years. Faculty hires, staff hires, and etc. Big money they give, and so they are able to hire staff and all. And then after 5 years, the ministry wants the university to absorb these new programs into their actual main curriculum. The problem is that doesn't happen usually. Very few of these universities continue on after 5 years. That's why when they hire people to teach at this program, they give you a contract for 5 years because they know in 5 years it's going to end. That's not what the ministry wanted, but that's what happens. And these universities, many of the high name, big names, the national universities, Waseda, Keio, Doshisha here maybe, they know that they are on the top of the food chain. So when the next program comes out after 5 years, which would definitely come out by the ministry, a new international program, then they will be chosen again. And it'll be another 5-year program. And the ministry will say, please absorb this after all. And then the university will say, we will try. In the end, they don't. And this has been continuing on for the last 20 or 30 years, I think. The same process of almost like Emperor's New Clothes, Hadaka no Osama, going through the motion like, oh yeah, we're going to do this program. And yeah, I was told by one of these senseis, it's called Dejima program. You know Dejima? Dejima is in Nagasaki. It's when Japan was in isolation, Sakoku. I always use the word Sakoku mine. When they're in Sakoku from 1603 to 1858, 250 years, the only port of entry, and I think only once or twice a year, the boats would come in from China, or I think the Netherlands, the Dutch, they would let the ship come in to trade. And that was called Dejima, which was the only contact to the outside world. These programs were called, maybe still are called, Dejima programs, meaning that they are programs that are put on the campus for those 5 years, and they are the connection to the outside world. But the main campus is not affected. The main campus doesn't absorb these in, doesn't welcome them in a way. It doesn't use to internationalize the campus. They just keep Dejima there, and that's their source outside. And then in 5 years, this is gone. And there's a new Dejima program in the same university at a different place. That's all that happens. It's kind of almost like a game, which I think, what a waste of money. These top level universities continue to get the funding, whereas all the rest of the universities, Japan has way more universities than it needs. It should be cut by 30 or 40% actually. But all these smaller universities never get the funding. Like I always say it, and I've been told by one of my viewers that Einstein didn't say this, but the saying is right on. Doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result is the sign of insanity. And that's what's going on in this Dejima program. So they're not specific program unless you speak Japanese. And if you come in an exchange, you probably cannot take anything in your major. You're just going for the experience. That's why they come over, they take Japanese language, they take courses in English in the afternoon usually. Nobody really takes courses in Japanese because they're not at that level, which is not their fault. It's just the reality of the situation. They will be expected to act the same way when they join a company, and they will treat their underlings the same way as that's really kind of sad, right? They have been trained in a program to raise these the way they treat their underlings or subordinates, and that just continues that system. You see that in the senpai and kohai system at the clubs, where they were. I remember when I was an exchange student at ICC, which is today Tokyo International University, when I was in the Shorinji Kempo club, and those senpai, third year and fourth year seniors, were super mean to their first and second year. They regarded it as that was the training, that's the way they were supposed to raise them. And I thought to myself, how mean, almost cruel at times. I remember somebody got a black eye. The guy, we called him Sarge, came from behind the guy. He didn't even give him a chance to, and hit him in the face. I remember he got all black, and he had to keep practicing. It was really like abuse, basically. I think a lot of that has maybe gone down a little bit, but you still see it going on. And then those people will come up and treat their people the same way, which is really sad. Maybe with internationalization, they'll start to be a critical thinker and say, maybe we shouldn't do this. Maybe the better way to raise them is to encourage them, to help, to support them, give them feedback, strict feedback, but encourage them. Maybe that's what they need in Japan, because the samurai system maybe is not the best at this point of Japan. If Japanese universities really want to globalize, they should hire more foreign professors and give them. Yes, this is the problem again. Only 5% of faculty in Japan are international, right? And of course, there is a difference, or there is for Japanese nationals. Several reasons, right? One, yeah, they're Japanese and they want to employ them, of course, most important. But two also is that the Japanese professors are not going to give any kind of real pushback, or they're not going to resist. Not like a lot of foreign professors do, right? Not in any bad way, but again, they're critical thinkers. They're giving you their opinion. The administration doesn't want to hear your opinion, so they would rather have Japanese that just like sheep, just quietly follow along. Remember, the standing nail gets pounded down. That's exactly what this is. Now, remember, I talked about in a couple of live streams before about Scuba University in Ibaraki, which in the 1970s and 80s, I think it was, they were supposed to become like the new Silicon Valley of Asia. And the whole idea was we're going to have all these companies around and we're going to be the center like a Stanford University. And it never happened. Well, they were bringing in people on scholarship and putting them through their postgraduate programs and all. The problem is that the foreign ministry did not want to give visas to these people to teach or stay. And in the end, they said, thank you for coming and thank you for going. And so all these other countries like Germany and Singapore and Hong Kong and the United States picked these people up. They were trained in Japan and they got good education and they work for them. Japan, again, as I said before in the live streams, is they trip themselves up. It's not somebody else tripping them from outside. Their systems trip themselves. And to me, like these should be the easiest problems to solve because it's internal. It's not external. But in many ways, it's for many Japanese systems and companies and universities, it's the most difficult. They don't know what to do, or nobody wants to say anything because you don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. And you don't want to be a standing nail and on and on and on. I have seen it, and I've seen it every day wherever in my job also. So yes, it's very true that they need to hire more foreigners. And you know what the sad part is that there is a shortage of workers. And yes, many of them are at the service levels and things. But I had mentioned at the beginning of this live stream, why don't you bring in IT specialists? Doesn't have to be from India, but in the world, there's a lot of people out there who would like to come to Japan. Now, if you look at the India rupee, and versus the yen still is quite strong. So I'm sure people would want to come. You just have to be able to invest and set up those programs to support them while they are here until they can transition in. That might take some cost at the beginning, but once the first group comes over, the first group can take care of the second group and on and on and on. Set up a system that works. I know there are a couple of companies in Tokyo that are doing that. They brought in people from India and they're setting it up. I don't know how that's going, but I would think that's the only real option. The degree-seeking students in Japan, the real so-called university students, are usually from Asia, which is fine. Many of them are from China. There's like 115,000 from China. But it would be nice to have other countries outside of Asia, especially Western countries, that would bring in a whole different way of thought and thinking. As people from Africa or South America, very, very few people are here. But the goal of Japan is to get 30% international students by 2033. And my question is, I don't know how you're going to do that if you keep the present system with the present way of teaching. Another problem is, even in the English programs, okay, I was talking about those English programs they set up, right? The English programs are set up that you can take 4 years and graduate in English. Everybody's going, yay, wow, all English program, great, right? The problem is, first, the students in the class are almost all, the majority are Japanese. So of course, before the class starts and after the class ends, they're all speaking what to each other? Japanese. They are trying to fill those classes with foreign students. And so at the beginning, they were scholarshiping a lot and it was 50-50. But more and more and more, they don't have the money because the 5-year, the Dejima plan ended. So now they have to survive. If the program is going to continue, a lot of them disappeared. I think Doshisha continued theirs. But when I said to them, how many people are in that program? They told me, 30. I said, 30? How can you survive with an entire faculty and run a 4-year program with only 30 students? And they go, oh no, but it's a good program. And I thought, oh my goodness, how naive. This was the Doshisha University director of the International Center, who I knew quite well, who said this to me. And I said, how naive. I was thinking, I didn't say that, of course. Again, the thinking is that there's no sense of you got to make money or you got to figure out how to make it survive. And these Doshisha continued their program. I don't know if it's still on, but they continued it even though it was running at a loss. So other courses would cover the cost and be able to allow that to go. But that's why most universities just do away with it. But again, in those English courses, and I have a good friend who was in the Waseda All English program. And Waseda is one of the top, right? Tokyo University, Waseda Keio. So I asked her, after she did 2 years of that program, she went for study abroad 1 year, I think at Lewis and Clark in Oregon, and then came back, graduated. And she was in the company I was working with, a study abroad company. And I asked her, and I said, tell me, you saw how they teach in America. Do they teach like that at Waseda? And she said, no, they teach the same as they teach in Japanese. So I said, you're only getting like one test? You're not getting constant assessment? She goes, yeah. And I said, so they're teaching in English, correct? She goes, yeah, they're speaking English, but their teaching style, their presentation style is same as Japanese. Boring, one way, no student interaction, not student-centered. And I was shocked because the whole point of creating this all English program, you would think, wasn't only English, right? It was the idea that you would make it like a Western style or more of a Socratic style of teaching, but it wasn't. Everything else was the same. Just English was the language used to teach one way. The moment that the student left, they were speaking Japanese because it's all Japanese, usually more Japanese, very, very few foreigners. So again, I thought, wow, what a waste of money. It missed the whole point. And so a lot of students might falsely believe like, oh, I took this program, or companies might think, oh, you can speak English. Well, they listen and they probably are very good at comprehending English, but they never really had opportunities to speak English or communicate in English, unless they had foreign student friends. So yes, again, I think they set up the program, but when you look underneath, where's the beef? Where's the beef? Sammy says, I was treated as a black sheep, but in Canada, where I've been living for the past 3 decades, I'm called a maverick. It's a big difference. Yeah. That is really interesting. In Japan, Sammy might be looked at as the black sheep. In a negative way, I think this is, right, Sammy? And then in Canada, he's looked at as a maverick. So again, same person, different perspective. So positive, is the glass half full or half empty? Basically, that's what you're saying, right, Sammy? I'm glad you're a maverick. Stay in Canada. You can be maverick. That's great. I like that. Foreign professors will be isolated in their own Dejima and their knowledge experience they try to give to their students will be put away in the closet after the class is over. Yeah, that could be true too. In some ways, they will be isolated. Depends on their Japanese level and how well they associate. And again, who their department people are made up of. But hopefully, Japan Ham, even though it's slow, gradual, that these foreign professors will chip away at these students. And maybe even if it's a small part, that little bit, they think a little differently or they see things a little differently. I think it's a start. It's better than nothing, I guess, is what I'm saying. But also, I think eventually that will start to grow as Japan starts to realize how important it is to be so-called global. Again, nobody understands this right now. And if anything, Japanese are going backwards in the sense that 80,000 in 2002, 60,000, I think in 2013. And today, after Corona, it's about the same as that. But again, when you say 60,000, it could be a 1-month program or a 2-week program. You know, a lot of times the Japanese government and JASO, that's the underneath the Ministry of Education, they take care of state abroad. They count everybody. So even like inbound, right? That was the big thing Abe had. We're going to get 300,000 students by, the certain, and they hit that amount, right? I think 2018 or something, they hit 300. Everybody was like, yay, yay, yay. My question was, are these degree-seeking students? Probably very few, not many at least. How long is the program? Is it at least for a year? A lot of the American programs were 1 semester, sometimes 1 month. They're even 2-week programs, right? And they were counting them. There were vocational schools. Now, vocational schools are fine. They can be counted, of course, and things. Anything that's, like a college or a school, that's fine. But when it comes down to length, if it's very, very short and very limited, then you really can't say that we can count them as the same as a degree-seeking student. But because the government needed to show numbers, they just put them all together. Just so say, oh, 300,000, yay! But that's not the true story. Be mindful when you hear something like that it's not always the same story. If you're willing to pay your dues, I think you can get people to buy into what you want to do, but you gotta pay your dues. It might be a couple of years you're just sitting at some Japanese meeting that every week that you don't understand anything, or just being nice to people. It's hard. It's hard to go in and be a maverick right away. doesn't work. You got to get buy-in and people to like you and things. And I think that has been my problem, is that in my companies, I thought that I had enough of a background that I could do what I thought was right. And again, I failed on that because I got stopped right away with a yellow card, basically saying, Mike, don't worry, don't do anything. Everything will be okay. There's no rush. And a couple other things. A lot of times, Japan will go to these national conferences. This is to set up exchange programs and study abroad programs, any kind of international programs between universities of the world, like NAFSA. They're getting like 10,000 attendees, right? EAIE, the European one, that they would get 3,000 to 5,000. Japan, like at NAFSA, was the biggest booth of any country. They had like, I don't know how many schools, like 50 or more. And the problem there is Japan doesn't have much to sell, meaning that what they are offering is very limited. They have regular courses, but you got to be able to speak Japanese. They have their study abroad programs to learn Japanese and experience like a culture experience program and take courses of English. But a lot of like Americans, they want to do their coursework so they don't have to take another year to graduate. It doesn't match. And it's not necessarily Japan's fault. Other countries do deal with similar. But because it goes back to English, I'm sorry, if the courses are not offered in English, the English speakers are not coming. Now, maybe you don't need the English speakers. Maybe it's the Chinese speakers and the Korean speakers who can speak Japanese. Maybe that's the market. That's fine if that's what you want. The only thing that I would say though is that Asia as an area, there's a similarity. I call it Asianness. I think even me as a Japanese American, I got a little bit of that Asianness, which means that you kind of relate. It's a little bit easier. You know how to kind of fit in, and that's fine. But I also think it's good to get people who come from completely different areas to turn your world upside down in a way that makes you think and see things differently. Let's say I went to Thailand or Korea to study. I would be okay. I would enjoy it. It'd be fun. It'd be easier for me to study there if I was Japanese, than if I went to Ireland or UK or somewhere like that where the norms and the culture and the belief systems are very different. So I think you need a very diverse group of international students. You can't have only predominantly Asia or predominantly only English-speaking countries. You need to have a good mix, and that really builds the whole idea of internationalization. I was at a dormitory in Kyoto. It was run by the Swiss, I don't know if it was the government. It's still there. I don't remember the name, but when I was at Doshisha, and they had a kind of a neat way of quota system. So 50% were Japanese, and then they took different countries. Maximum, I think, was 3 from one country. So they had, 3 Chinese, they had 3 Koreans. I think I was the only American at the first, and then a couple more after I brought in. And so I thought it was at least a good example of trying to make more of an international idea where you set a quota system. Some people don't believe in quota systems, but sometimes you have to do that. If not, you have predominantly only one. Doesn't really help with the whole idea of internationalization. Lastly, I wanted to end like most Japanese professors or presidents of universities, they don't get it. They live in almost like a fantasy land, or maybe they just say things that sound so lofty. For example, the president of Tokyo University, President Fujii, when he took over as president, this was his speech, quote, "Into a sea of diversity, creating the future through dialogue." That was his kind of like his mantra. His plan was to attract more international students and offer more courses taught in English. But again, as I was saying before, is that what's going to attract international students to Tokyo University? And offering more courses in English, unless you teach it in a very dynamic, student-centered, interesting way, it's not going to sell. In fact, there was a group of students I met from Waseda University, which is again a top level. They had come over on exchange, and they were in a class a Japanese professor was teaching. And I guess he was so bad, so boring, that they actually started a petition in the class to have this professor removed, which of course would never happen in a Japanese university. And that's why a lot of times the foreign students or the foreign staff or whatever are kind of looked at in a very suspicious way, or not in always the best way, because they are the people who complain, or they are the people who want it and they want to get their money's worth, or they're not going to just go with the flow. But anyway, they started a petition. They didn't get that professor removed, but everybody was shocked that you came as a guest, not a guest, but like a exchange student to this university, and you started a petition to have the the teaching professor removed from the class because he taught so poorly. So again, that's the other side of bringing in foreign staff and bringing in foreign students, right? Is that people may complain or criticize, or like I'm saying now, I don't know the answer. Like, where's that fine line of in between somewhere where you do it sincerely and yet you are able to accept things as they come? I have been here over 30 years and I'm still learning where that point is. I've gotten much better because the last maybe couple of years at this job and the one before that has humbled me and has made me more like, I cannot be myself. I cannot be the standing nail. I have to just kind of keep my mouth shut and be a good samurai, which is hard for me because I'm kind of talkative. Japan Ham is really correct. I don't want to sound like a doom and gloom, like it's going to take decades and years, but it's going to take a long time. Unless, you know what's interesting is during the Meiji, back in 1858, when Perry came with the black ship, Kurofune, Japan suddenly went to a shift where everybody was getting rid of the kimono and the Western ways, and they were wearing suits and they were wearing Western wear. And you know, like I remember, I think is it New York or Boston, one of the museums there, they had all the block prints because in the Meiji era, Japan was throwing those out and somebody was smart enough to collect them and bring them back to America. So there are a lot more there than I think maybe in a lot of the museums in Japan. So, but they were able to do that shift, which is very interesting, you know, so something clicked. But until that tipping point happens, it's really slow in Japan. For those of you who have paddled a outrigger canoe, like when I was in Hawaii, we would, you know, when we took the kids out, when I was a camp counselor, we take them out and they would flip the canoe, just the counselors, to practice if this happens when you have the kids, how to overturn it back so you can paddle back in. Well, it's super hard when you have an outrigger, and the way you do it is like, you know, it takes like everybody, and you know, if it's rough, it's hard, it's almost impossible sometimes, but you know, you have to bring it over. And that's what reminds me of Japan and change. It's like an outrigger. But the moment that outrigger reaches a certain level, a tipping point, then it goes vroom. Where is that point in Japan? Is it 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? Who knows? And I think the other part that makes it even more difficult is Japanese are gamang zuyoi. Gamang meaning endurance and strong, right? Gamang wa bitoku. That means gamang, to endure and withstand, is a virtue in Japan. When it's hot or cold, you know, Japanese kind of just grit and bear it. That's a virtue. So the Japanese, it will take them a much longer than other people maybe to change because they gamang. They keep gamanging, you know, they continue to accept that, okay, I have to endure this, we have to go through this. And so it might take even longer than another country because Japan, they pride this idea of gamang being a virtue. And I'll do another live stream maybe in 2 weeks, maybe about global life skills. In fact, Sammy Takahashi, who has commented here, Sammy was the one who first introduced me to global life skills. And then I wrote a book about different, you know, soft skills, which are like the global life skills. I think I'm going to talk about that in 2 weeks, about and why I think Japan needs that. You know, it's like small talk, it's like presentation, it's like independent thinking, it's like spontaneity, it's like improvisation, it's like sense of humor. And Sammy, that's thanks to you, global life skills. Thank you.